A few weeks ago, I talked about the miniseries on Netflix entitled Self-Made, which is inspired by the life of Madam C.J. Walker. Now, I've talked about Madam C.J. Walker a number of times. I deal with her in my lecture series, Great African Women in History, the Mothers of Civilization. And this past week, I went through and watched it twice, okay, because I've been so busy. And I have Netflix, but I hadn't even watched Netflix in about a week, at least here at home. I haven't even watched it, so I renewed my subscription. Because I only watch Netflix about once a month, right? When I first heard about this series, I was excited because the story of Madam C.J. Walker really needs to be told. For us to see the factory that she had and the system, the sales system that she created, and hiring thousands of African American women to sell her products, and these women learn about business, they learn about sales. Most of them made more money than their husbands. Okay, so we need to really see something like this. And what's important to understand is that this is 45, 50 years after slavery ends. Okay, even less than that, because it starts out in 1908. 1915 was the 50th year anniversary of the Civil War ending and the 13th Amendment. So we're talking about in less than 50 years, you're going to have a Madam C.J. Walker. You're going to have an Annie Turnbull Malone. Annie Turnbull Malone is the real person who the fictitious character of Addie Monroe was patterned after. Okay, so let's look at we're going to look at two things. One, I have about 4 pages of notes I took on this, on the series. Two, let's look at this article from OprahMag.com because they interviewed A'Lelia Bundles. A'Lelia Bundles is the great-great-granddaughter of great-great-great-granddaughter of Madam C.J. Walker. And she wrote the biography on her own ground, And the series is loosely based on that biography also. Okay. Now, at one point, Halle Berry was supposed to play the role of Madam C.J. Walker. And it ended up being Octavia Spencer. Okay, Octavia Spencer did a great job. But let's see here. Before the Bundles was interviewed by Oprah Mag, and I think she's talking, who is she talking about here? So Halle Berry was once suggested to play the role of Madam C.J. Walker. This is just one detail that A'Lelia Bundles, biographer, journalist, and Madam C.J. Walker's great-great-great-granddaughter reveals when discussing her 50-year journey of bringing her descendant's story to the small screen. Now, before Self-Made, Walker's life was nearly made into a TV miniseries in the 1980s, backed by Roots author Alex Haley before his death. But after bouncing to several producers, directors, and studios like Columbia TriStar, and HBO, the project always hit a roadblock. The suggestion that Halle Berry star as Madam C.J. Walker, whose real name was Sarah Breedlove, the suggestion that Halle Berry stars Madam C.J. Walker, before the show was optioned to Netflix, A'Lelia Bundles explains the possibility was posed to her years ago by a director who was interested in collaborating on the project. A'Lelia Bundles, the great-great-great-granddaughter of Madam C.J. Walker, and I'm going to reach out to her to set up an interview with. I've talked to her before with Facebook friends, and I've talked to her a few times in the past. She said, quote, "I said she's a really great actress," referring to Halle Berry, "but she doesn't look anything like Madam C.J. Walker. Bundles tells OprahMag.com. She went on to say, quote, "And that person said to me, most people don't know what Madam Walker looks like, so it doesn't really matter. And I said, you know, the people who do know what Madam Walker looks like would, and I care about those people." End quote. Yeah, because Halle Berry's not, she's fine as hell, but, you know, she looks totally different. Those are two different people. Both beautiful women, but just totally different. Okay? So the role of Madam C.J. Walker ultimately went to Octavia Spencer in Netflix's Self-Made, which is based on Bundle's 2001 biography entitled On Her Own Ground. On Her Own Ground. The story isn't perfect as it faces criticism for a weak script, fact versus fiction storylines, and the way it heavily dramatizes conflict between two successful African American women on the basis of colorism. That said, Self-Made does successfully bring Madam C.J. Walker's story to the forefront, especially for those whose knowledge of her stops at one-day Black history lessons. Because most people really don't. I do lectures and I talk about Annie Turnbull Malone, I talk about Madam C.J. Walker, things like this. Most people don't know the history of Madam C.J. Walker. This is a fascinating life. This sister died when she was either 51 or 52. One source I saw said 52. Here, this article says 51. But, you know, when we look at her as well as Annie Turnbull Malone, Madam C.J. Walker was born in 1867. She's born 2 years after slavery ends. She's born to former slaves. And for her to accomplish what she did, man, it's just unbelievable. And she's doing this largely before the 50th year anniversary of the 13th Amendment and the Civil War ending. So Lilia Bundles hopes that the new show will inspire viewers to seek facts about Madam C.J. Walker's life. She said, quote, "There are characters who don't exist in real life and scenes that don't really happen. But of course, this is the way a story gets attention, and that is the way a story has to be told in Hollywood," she says. "I'm hoping that people will walk away, especially because of Octavia Spencer's strong portrayal, with a sense of Madam C.J. Walker's courage and her ability to build a business to empower other women, to see that she's more than just hair products, that she's a philanthropist and political activist." Okay, so then they go through and list some dispel some myths and list fact versus fiction, things like this in the that's depicted in the series. Okay, I'm going to highlight a couple of things. I'll do a separate video because this is the last segment of my show, and this is a 2-hour show that's not 3 hours. So I'm going to do a separate video where I go deep into this. But we'll talk. I'll give you some highlights here from my notes and my observations. There was one article that I read from who was this from? Bustle.com. Because there was a scene that took place with Booker T. Washington, okay? And I wasn't sure if that was true or not. The depiction that happened. One, the actor Roger Guinevere, who portrayed Booker T. Washington, fantastic actor. Don't look a damn thing like Booker T. Washington. I don't know who did the casting. I don't know what was going on with that. Roger Guinevere, he had a recurring role on A Different World. He did a one-man act where he was portraying Huey P. Newton. Fantastic actor. Okay? He was in Malcolm X, one scene in Malcolm X when they were planning a robbery. But Bustle.com has an article, Booker T. Washington and Madam C.J. Walker's feud in Self-Made was even more complicated. Okay, Booker T. Washington and Madam C.J. Walker's feud in Self-Made was even more complicated. And let's see here. Let me see if I can pull this up on the other. Let me pull this up on the other computer here. So oftentimes what happens is, well, let me back up. First of all, this is inspired by the life of Madam C.J. Walker. When you look at it from Netflix, it doesn't say, and largely it doesn't say based on a true story. It's inspired by the life of Madam C.J. Walker. When you see a movie or a miniseries that says inspired by something, that means that the depictions that you see are loosely based on the truth. If it says based on a true story, the depiction that you see is more accurate, but there's still going to be some fiction in there. I'm telling you right now, because it's Hollywood. There's still going to be some fiction in there. But if you see inspired by such and such, inspired by the book, that means it's loosely based on it. Okay? Which means there's going to be more fiction in it. All right, let's pull up this article here. Okay, so this is from March 20th, 2020. Booker T. Washington and Madam C.J. Walker's feud in Self-Made was even more complicated. So, let's see here. While Booker T. Washington and Madam C.J. Walker's relationship in Self-Made is purely antagonistic, in real life it was much more complex, and their frosty relationship later gave way to mutual respect. As the miniseries Self-Made tells it, Walker's attempts at gaining the endorsement of Booker T. Washington was full of false starts. After Sarah fails to get an audience with Booker T. Washington, her husband C.J. Walker, who was actually her third husband, C.J. Charles Joseph Walker. This is where she gets the moniker Madam C.J. Walker from. That's from his name, Charles Joseph Walker, portrayed by Blair Underwood. Blair Underwood did a good job. He's a fantastic actor. He did a good job of portraying Charles Joseph Walker. So she fails to get an audience with Booker T. Washington. Charles Joseph Walker startles him in the bathroom, falsely conveying to Sarah that Washington agreed to dine with them. Sarah Breedlove hopes that Washington will introduce her at his 1912 National Negro Business League convention. Her hopes are dashed when he instead calls her rival Addie Monroe to the stage. Now, Addie Monroe is a fictitious character loosely based on Annie Turmo Malone, it was Annie Turmo Malone who really created the black hair care industry, and she was the one who hires Sarah Breedlove right around 1904, hires Sarah Breedlove to be a salesperson for her. So Sarah Breedlove learns the hair care industry from Annie Turmo Malone. Okay? In the miniseries, Addie Monroe, the fictitious character, who's half white, and the victim of her mother being raped by the slave master. Literally, this is alluded to in the movie, because you got to see. Because the movie opens up in 1908 in St. Louis. So you still have former slaves who are still alive. Booker T. Washington doesn't die till 1915. He's a former slave. Harriet Tubman's still alive. She doesn't die till 1913. You have former slaves who are alive going into the 1940s. So slavery is a backdrop. Slavery, the legacy of slavery, former slaves, that is a subtext in this whole story. So Addie Monroe refuses to hire Sarah Breedlove as a salesperson because she says you don't have the right look. She's saying you're too dark, because her saleswomen are basically very light skinned, and a lot of them half white. Okay. So you see this depicted. Okay. So for some reason the producers decided they wanted to have this tension dealing with colorism. Okay. Now I'm not sure if they did it to draw attention to colorism, so we can learn from it to progress, or if they're suffering from it. I don't know. I'm still researching this. So let me just okay, let's go back to this here. Booker T. Washington and Madam C.J. Walker. So we get to see Booker T. Washington's National Negro Business League convention depicted, which is huge. Okay. So her hopes are dashed when instead Booker T. Washington calls to the stage her rival Addie Monroe. Finally, after it's clear Booker T. Washington has no intention of acknowledging her presence in the audience, Sarah Breedlove storms the stage and gives her own introduction. This infuriates Booker T. Washington, and in the hallway he calls her outburst, quote, rude and uncalled for, end quote. He accuses her company of shaming Negroes into Eurocentric standards of beauty, and that, quote, soon you will have Negro women out earning Negro men, end quote, he says. Quote, how is America going to take us seriously if we allow our women to surpass us? That outburst in there is precisely the reason why you ladies need to be kept in your place, end quote. So this is what, in the series, this is what Booker T. Washington says to her. Another subtext of this miniseries is misogyny in the African American community. That's a subtext of this, keeping women in their place, because the wife of Booker T. Washington is portrayed, and they're part of a national colored women's organization. But these are all mainly college-educated, accomplished women. And Madam C.J. Walker is saying, why are you content with being in the background and serving lunch to the men and things like this? She said, a lot of you all are more educated than your husbands are. Now, she's not advocating for them to try to be superior to their husbands. But what she's saying is that why are we relegated to the background? Why are we not out in the forefront with the men, as opposed to being relegated to the background? So when you watch this, you see that context there. Now, one of the things I wish had been depicted in the film, and then at the end of the fourth installment, they talk about some of her philanthropic endeavors, and they talk about some of her activism, because she gets involved in the anti-lynching efforts, right? Just like in the civil rights movement. See, there was misogyny in the civil rights movement that's not talked about a lot. Now, John Lewis has talked about this. Representative John Lewis has talked about this, because the civil rights movement was largely, in general, led by African-American male ministers. So misogyny is coming out of white supremacy and racism. It's taught to us, and some African-American men internalize it and act based upon the program. So it was in the civil rights movement. We also see it going back to these movements in the early 1900s. And so we saw it with William Monroe Trotter. William Monroe Trotter, brilliant brother. William Monroe Trotter, civil rights leader, things like this. But William Monroe Trotter was a sexist. Dr. King was a sexist also. This is something that's not talked about a lot. This is why Dr. King and Ella Baker didn't get along very well, because Dr. King didn't feel that a woman should be in a leadership position in the Southern Christian Leadership Conference, a permanent leadership position. Ella Baker was a co-founder of the Southern Christian Leadership Conference, along with Dr. King in 1957. But see, this is a subtext of the civil rights movement. When you really study history, you see this. But and Ella Baker is going to end up leaving the Southern Christian Leadership Conference when she gets passed over for a permanent leadership position. It's because of sexism. And we see this going back into the early 1900s in a lot of these organizations as well. Because, see, William Monroe Trotter didn't believe that women belonged in the movement. So I don't think he got along too well with Ida B. Wells, because they were both in the Afro-American Afro-American Council together. This is before the Niagara Movement. Niagara Movement comes along in 1905. Before the Niagara Movement, you had the Afro-American Council created in 1898 by T. Thomas Fortune and Bishop Alexander Walters. And Dr. W.B. Du Bois, Ida B. Wells, Booker T. Washington, they're all members of the Afro-American Council. It's called Afro-American because the term Afro-American goes back to the 1830s. They ain't starting in the 1960s, like some people believe. That goes back to the 1830s. Just like the Afro-American newspaper, that goes back to about 1882 in Baltimore, still exists today. Okay? So when you like study these different dynamics and nuances of these different movements, right? You start seeing this subcontext. All right, so let's continue here. So Booker T. Washington in the series chastises Madam C.J. Walker. So Self-Made is based on her own ground by Madam C.J. Walker's great-great-granddaughter, Lydia Bundles. Now, in the piece from Oprah.com, it said great-great-great-granddaughter. I think she's the great-great-great-granddaughter. Now, just for the sake of accuracy, and at the end of the series they say this, Lydia Bundles is not a blood relative to Madam C.J. Walker. Lydia Bundles is, since they put it in here, since they put it in at the end of episode 4, I'm going to say it. Okay, this is not by any means an attack or anything like that. It's just stating facts because they stated it at the end of the series. Lilia Walker was the daughter of Madam C.J. Walker. She was the daughter from Madam C.J. Walker's, was it her second husband or first husband? One of them. She was married 3 times. But I think it was her first husband. But anyway, my point is that you see the young girl in the series. Her name is Fairy May, dark skin, long hair, beautiful sister. Lilia Bundles, Lilia Walker, who becomes Lilia Bundles, ends up adopting Fairy May. Okay, Fairy May is going to go on to Spelman College, and she's going to become president of the Walker Company in 1931. Fairy May. Fairy May marries twice and has 2 children, and she's going to have 3 grandchildren. Lilia Bundles, who wrote the book On Her Own Ground, is one of Fairy May's 3 grandchildren. Okay, so at the end of the 4th installment, and they're laying out some history about Madam C.J. Walker, things like this, that's talked about. Okay, so let's go back to this article. So Booker T. Washington was really initially resistant to Madam C.J. Walker speaking at his events, though, and he did dislike the cosmetic industry because, per Booker T. Washington biographer Lewis R. Harlan, Harlan, they, quote, fostered imitation of white beauty standards, end quote. Now, per Alelia Bundles and Harlan, Lewis R. Harlan, the author. In January 1912, Madam C.J. Walker heard of Booker T. Washington's Negro Farmers Conference at the Tuskegee Institute and personally visited Washington's home to ask if he could introduce her to the attendees. He turned her down, but Madam C.J. Walker persisted, and eventually Booker T. Washington allowed her to speak at a side venue called the Chapel, Chapel. Now, despite taking hair care to a bunch of farmers, Alelia Bundles wrote that the reaction was sufficiently positive that Booker T. Washington allowed her to market her products for the rest of the conference. Madam C.J. Walker expressed gratitude and even made a small donation to the school. Now, despite this positive interaction, Booker T. Washington was strangely non-committal when Madam C.J. Walker asked him later that year if she could then speak at his National Negro Business League convention. Okay? That's the one that you see depicted in Self-Made. The convention that you see depicted in Self-Made. That's the National Negro Business League. That was founded right around 1900 by Booker T. Washington. The Colored Merchants Association, which was a cooperative, and it was a cooperative to help African American grocery store owners better market their grocery stores to compete against the rise of the chain stores, the A&Ps and the Kresge's, things like this. That comes about 1927, the Colored Merchants Association. Okay, if you read the book Collective Courage by Dr. Jessica Gordon Nimhard, who I've interviewed in the past, this book deals with our deep, rich history of cooperative economics, the cooperatives, the co-ops. Okay, we have a deep, rich history that most people don't know dealing with that. And the co-ops were our strength because this is operating based upon principles we brought with us from Africa, principles of the cooperatives. And to have a successful cooperative, you have to cooperate. So when we have a breakdown and eradication of the cooperatives, that helps to break down the cooperation. So despite the positive interaction, Booker T. Washington was strangely non-committal when Madam C.J. Walker asked him later that year if she could speak at his National Negro Business League convention. When her friend George Knox, K-N-O-X, George Knox, stood up in the audience to ask if the audience would hear Madam C.J. Walker's remarkable story during a Q&A session, Booker T. Washington icily dismissed him by calling on another attendee. After Booker T. Washington called up several other men to present, all with smaller businesses than what Madam C.J. Walker had, Alelia Bundles, the author, Alelia Bundles noted Madam C.J. Walker stood up and addressed Washington from the audience. Quote, "Surely you are not going to shut the door in my face," end quote, she said. "I feel that I am in a business that is a credit to the womanhood of our race. I went into a business that is despised, that is criticized and talked about by everybody," end quote. She described how she came from the cotton fields of the South, became a washerwoman, a cook, and finally the head of her own company. Quote, "I am not ashamed of my humble beginning," end quote, Madam C.J. Walker said. Quote, "My object in life is not simple. My object in life is not simply to make money for myself, but to use a part of what I make in trying to help others," end quote. This is where Self-Made inserted Booker T. Washington's sexist accusations. But Lilia Bundles wrote that no recorded transcripts from that day, quote, reveal Booker T. Washington's personal unspoken reaction, end quote, to Madam C.J. Walker's speech. Booker T. Washington did openly ignore her, though, calling on the next male presenter as if Madam C.J. Walker had not uttered a word. Now, Booker T. Washington's snubs and hot and cold attitude were undeniably ridiculous and ego-driven, but Madam C.J. Walker persisted in winning him over and gaining his endorsement. In July 1913, she invited Booker T. Washington to be her house guest for the dedication of a new Indianapolis YMCA, which both Booker T. Washington and Madam C.J. Walker donated money to. He surprisingly accepted, and Walker showed him every courtesy at her house. In return, Booker T. Washington praised Madam C.J. Walker to the YMCA audience, recognizing she was the largest donor at the event. She also donated $5,000 to the NAACP. Up until 1919, she was the largest donor to the NAACP. In the history of the NAACP, she donated $5,000 to the NAACP. Now, finally, at the Tuskegee Institute's 1913 National Negro Business League Convention, just a year after he spurned her, Booker T. Washington introduced Madam C.J. Walker to attendees as a quote striking example of the possibilities of Negro womanhood in the business world, end quote. Booker T. Washington must have begun to realize Madam C.J. Walker's money-making potential, as well as the symbolic and inspirational value of having a former washerwoman turned philanthropist support his school, Lilia Bundles theorized. Lilia Bundles went on to say, she in turn fully understood the advantages of having a connection with the man who controlled the editorial policies and purse strings of dozens of black newspapers. Ultimately, Madam C.J. Walker's relationship with Booker T. Washington shows exactly why she was a successful businesswoman. She was persistent and bold and never let a man's ego get in the way of her dreams. Read this article. See, this is like deep, deep history. Two iconic figures, Madam C.J. Walker and Booker T. Washington. Okay? This is some deep history here. This is on March 20th, 2020, written by Gretchen Smail, S-M-A-I-L, for Bustle.com. Booker T. Washington and Madam C.J. Walker's feud in Self-Made was even more complicated. Okay, so check out this article. We'll post a link here. Also read the article from OprahMag.com. They go through the special mess. I'll do another broadcast dealing with this. One, they talk about Madam C.J. Walker and Annie Turnbull Malone weren't such bitter rivals. Malone was a pioneer in the African-American hair care industry, and her successes were extremely underscored in the series. She also was not a light-skinned black woman, even though much of her and Walker's feud in the show was based upon their differing skin tones, a storyline that many felt was unnecessary. What is true, however, is that Madam C.J. Walker did work as a saleswoman for Annie Turnbull Malone, T-U-R-N-B-O, before branching out and creating her own successful business. But that connection did not drive either woman's success. For example, Annie Turnbull Malone definitely did not follow Madam C.J. Walker across the country in an effort to stifle her business, as depicted in the series. Lilia Bundles says, quote, they were competitors, but for me that competition is not the centerpiece of Madam Walker's life. I think it becomes the centerpiece of Self-Made in order to create tension. I think the writers, if you interview them, would say this is a composite character. It's not necessarily Annie Malone. In reality, she did not move to Indianapolis, and it wasn't as an in-your-face kind of competition. Okay, so it's loosely based on Annie Turmo Malone, but it's not 100% based. There's a lot of fiction interwoven into this series. The other thing that was false in here, or very little evidence to support, is that A'Lelia Walker, the daughter of Madam C.J. Walker, was gay or queer. She and her daughter disagreed over Lilia's love life, but it's not what you think. So in the show, in the series, Walker is frustrated that her daughter Lilia, played by Tiffany Haddish. Now, Tiffany Haddish did a great job. In general, I like Tiffany Haddish. It's good to see her play a role where she's not doing a whole bunch of cussing and just being vulgar and just acting stupid, things like this. You know, because I think she has a lot of potential. I hope she doesn't get typecasted. But in the show, Madam C.J. Walker is frustrated with her daughter A'Lelia because of her disinterest in starting a family and her reluctance to take the inheritance of Madam C.J. Walker's hair care legacy seriously. It also insinuated that A'Lelia was queer in that her mother disapproved. But Alila Bundles says there's very little evidence to support that plot line. However, Bundles says there was real drama that she would have loved to see on the show, and it had to do with Lilia's last two husbands, Wiley Wilson and James Arthur Kennedy. She said, quote, they were both doctors and they were both very handsome, she says, and one was a bad boy and one was a good guy. And of course she was in love with the bad boy, Wilson, and her mother knew the bad boy was a bad boy and really favored the good guy, Kennedy. All right, let's see here. Yeah, it was with her first husband, Moses McWilliams. Madam C.J. Walker married her first husband when she was 14 years old. And it was with her first husband that she had her child, her only child, A'Lelia Walker. Yeah, that was her first husband, Moses McWilliams. Okay, so very quickly here, let me look at some of my notes. So I talked about slavery being a backdrop here, right? And there was one character played by Garrett Morris, who was on the first season of Saturday Night Live, veteran actor. You saw him in Cooley High. He was Uncle Junior on the Jamie Foxx show. He plays the role of Charles Joseph Walker's father. Okay, his name is Cleophas. And he's a former slave. And he talks about slavery and being on Master Walker's plantation, because this is where they get the Walker name from. That was the name of their slave owner. So it's like seeing a collision of two different worlds. You see former slaves who are still alive talking about what it was like to be a slave on a plantation while working in a business empire owned by a black woman. This is all right there taking place real time. And it appears, because I went and looked at Charles Joseph Walker's bio, he was born in 1851, so it appears he was a former slave also, because there was a scene where Cleophas, played by Garrett Morris, asked him, do you remember Master Walker? And he told him, well, you were probably too young to remember Master Walker. But he talks about being on the plantation, and he said there was a scene where he said that Cleophas said to Charles, his son, you keep calling this our business, meaning you and Sarah Breedlove. She keeps calling it her business. And he said, you remember Master Walker? He said, you were too young to remember Master Walker. He said, on the plantation, Master Walker kept talking about our crops and our this and all that, when really he meant it was his. And he told his son something to the effect of, you have to make your own money. Okay, he said and he told him, don't make your money the same place where you get your honey. Right? But you have this dynamic where you have former slaves still alive, and at the same time you have a black business empire that exists. Now, the fictitious character of Addie Monroe, her mother's a former slave. Her mother was raped. It's alluded to in the series. Her mother was raped by the slave master, and she said, and there's a scene. She's talking to her mother on the telephone, and her mother talks about how her daughter it has light skin and good hair, and she says the master cursed me with the daughter, but she says something to the effect, you're going to be all right because you have light skin and good hair, things like this. So we see slavery as a subtext in this series and the legacy of slavery. Okay? Let's see here. So Cleophas was a former slave. He talks to Charles Joseph Walker. We see door-to-door selling depicted. Sarah wanted to create a company she could pass on to her daughter, create a legacy. Lelia said, hair is your dream, but not mine. Her daughter said, hair is your dream, but not my dream. Sarah said, don't gamble your future away on a man. Make your own money. Lelia was a college graduate. So we see, Madam C.J. Walker was born in 1867. She was born 2 years after slavery ends. She was a washerwoman and a cook. But she was able to send her daughter to college. And she's able to create a business empire. And she was born 2 years after slavery ended. I mean, this is just an amazing story. So early on, when she starts her business, things move slowly. Her husband CJ gave her 2 weeks to turn things around. And CJ, as the pig, now CJ is going to end up cheating on her. The woman he cheats with her, the woman he cheats with on Madam C.J. Walker, she was a real woman. That was her name. Her name was Dora, I think it was. And they're going to end up getting married. He divorces her. And one source said 1910. I think maybe he went to court in 1910 and there was a delay. But another source I see 1912. Maybe it wasn't finalized in 1912. Okay. But he's going to end up marrying Dora, who he cheated with. They're going to start a type of Walker hair company, and Dora's going to try to pass herself off as Madam C.J. Walker, because the C.J. Walker comes from Charles Joseph Walker. Okay, but that's short-lived. That's not successful at all. It's what I notice is that they interject various parts of history into this series as in passing. So there's one scene where they're going to church. Well, actually, before that scene, they're sitting around, and it looks like it's a telegram, and it's printing out on a piece of paper. So they must not have radios, because they're reading the teletype, and it's about the Jack Johnson fight that's taking place. Okay? Because radios existed at that time, but I don't know why they didn't have one, so I don't know what's going on with that. Because radios existed at that time. But then there's a scene, they're going to church, And they say 26 Negroes were killed because Jack Johnson won the fight. And then Charles Joseph Walker says there were riots in one character says there were riots in 7 cities. Another character says, I heard there were riots in 10 cities. But there was a rebellion against African Americans when Jack Johnson won the heavyweight championship, and when he would win his fights and beat up white men. There were lynchings that took place. There were white men trying to put, because I mean, we were ecstatic, just like when Joe Louis won the heavyweight championship. But we were ecstatic when Jack Johnson won, and this was an effort to terrorize African Americans and try to keep us in our place. Okay, let's see here. Okay, so that's enough for now. We'll wrap it up there. I'll do another broadcast. We'll go deep into this because I have 4 pages of notes. All right, let's quickly look at some of your comments here. How's everybody doing? This is part 2 of the African History Network show because my Zoom broadcast was interrupted for the first part. So I was giving some comments about the series on Netflix, Self-Made. I saw the entire thing, watched it twice. So even though there's some fiction in it and things like this, I think overall it's good for people to see it. There's so many different aspects of this and so much history incorporated into this that we then need to go research and teach to our children. Okay? All right, so look, hey everybody, we're going to get out of here. Follow us on our Facebook fan page, The African History Network, The African History Network. Turn on notifications so you know when I go live. Follow me on my YouTube channel, Michael Imhotep, Imhotep. Turn on notifications so you know when I go live. All of my DVD lectures are available at our website, AfricanHistoryNetwork.com, AfricanHistoryNetwork.com. Also, if you want to donate to the African History Network, you can do it through Cash App, $the AHN Show through Cash App, $the AHN Show through Cash App, or through PayPal, paypal.me/the AHN Show, paypal.me/the AHN Show. If you want to advertise with the African History Network, email us at customerservice@AfricanHistoryNetwork.com, customerservice@AfricanHistoryNetwork.com. And we're on every Sunday, 9 p.m. to 11 p.m. Eastern Standard Time on 9:10 a.m. the Superstation WFDF in Detroit. We broadcast all over the country. So remember, at the African History Network, we focus on educating, empowering, and inspiring people of African descent throughout the diaspora and around the world. Because right now it's correct wrong behavior. What you do for yourself, what you do to yourself, and what you allow other people to do to you and get away with is based upon what you think about yourself. What you think about yourself is based upon what you have been taught about yourself. What you've been taught about yourself is based upon everything you've read, heard, and seen about yourself. So when you control the radius of a man's thoughts, you can control the circumference of his actions, because the mind can't do or teach what it doesn't know. Right now it's correct wrong behavior. It's not over till we win. Wakanda forever. We'll talk to you next week. Peace.